So I'm going to ask Hilary Benn to speak first, and just to say that you have biographies for each speaker in your pack, and that Hilary really needs no introduction. I think very well known on this island and in Britain. But he has been Labour MP for Leeds Central, first elected for many years, first elected in 1999, and previously has served as Secretary for International Development, a Minister in the Home Office, Secretary of State in the Department of the Environment, Shadow Leader of the House of Commons, and Shadow Foreign Secretary. And many of us will have watched with great interest his passionate speech on Syria this time last year. And I think today, as we see the horrific events unfolding in eastern Aleppo, we might be mindful of Hilary's intervention then. He was elected just this October as chairperson of the Exiting the EU Select Committee in the House of Commons, and he's going to speak with us today on Brexit, on the implications there.
Ivana, thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and I much enjoyed the conversation that I had with Brendan earlier, and I'm looking forward to the speech that you're about to give us. Look, I just want to say this. I cannot remember a year like 2016, and I don't really wish to remember a year like 2016. And as I said earlier, when someone who there are folk have described as a fascist narrowly avoids becoming elected as the President of Austria, and we regard that as the high point of the year, it tells you something about the other things that have happened. Look, I want to say I'm very sorry about the outcome of the referendum. I was a passionate Remain campaigner, as was the Labour Party, but we lost. And I think one of the lessons that we have to learn, because the forces that formed the 52% in Britain are, in my view, the same forces that put Donald Trump into the White House. They are the same forces that we will see on display in the elections that are coming up in Europe next year. And if you ask me why did 52% of people vote to leave, it was about migration, immigration, loss, change, sovereignty. We don't want to be told what to do anymore. Our wages have been stagnant. Things aren't working for us. There is inequality. It was a vote against the status quo. And that sends us a very, very powerful message wherever we are. And of course, I know it is a result that has been felt particularly keenly here in Ireland because of the very close relationship between our two countries, and I know it's something that's felt particularly by our good friends in the Irish Labour Party. Now, the UK will be leaving the European Union. We will be leaving the institutions of the European Union. We will not be leaving Europe. And the question on the ballot paper was, do we remain or leave? But what was not on the ballot paper is what is the nature of the future relationship going to be between the United Kingdom and the 27 member states once we have left. And that is what the negotiations that the UK is about to embark upon are going to be all about. Now, there are, of course, particular issues that affect the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, which I've spent the day in the interviews that I've given stating very clearly they must be taken fully account of. The Good Friday Agreement has got to be upheld and respected as part of any deal. I don't want to see a return to a hard border. I hope that the United Kingdom in the end decides to remain within the customs union. It's really important that the common travel area, which of course predated our membership of the European Union, is maintained in an agreement that will need to be reached, that will need to form part of the deal that is finally signed by the 27 member states and the United Kingdom. And it's important as a good friend that you express that view in all the conversations you're having with everyone that you talk to. Now, what is going to happen in these negotiations? Well, at the moment in the British Parliament, we're waiting to see what the government's negotiating plan is. We had a bit of a success as the Labour Party last week because we put down a motion saying the government should publish a plan, and the government has now accepted that it will have to do so and has agreed that will be before Article 50 is triggered. You may be following the court case in the Supreme Court. The hearing is now finished. We're awaiting the outcome. It's a very important constitutional case. It is about when the government can use the royal prerogative. It is not, however, a case about whether Britain is leaving the European Union, because we are. It is a court case about whose finger will be on the button when Article 50 is triggered. And the House of Commons Parliament will, in my view, certainly trigger Article 50, because although a majority of MPs campaigned for Remain, we lost the referendum. And if we think there is a crisis of confidence in our politics today, and I think there is, we see it right across the Western world, let me tell you what a crisis of confidence we would have in our politics if the British Parliament were to turn around to the British people and say, you know what, we think you voted the wrong way, we're going to ignore the result. That cannot happen, it is not going to happen, and the Article 50 process will begin. And then we have a very short space of time in which both to deal with the divorce settlement, because Article 50 is principally about the divorce, but also the new relationship. Now, the list of things that need to be covered, the list of questions that people ask, gets ever longer in my book, as I have taken up my role in chairing the Select Committee, and we have started to take evidence. And I apologise for having to leave before the end of this evening, but tomorrow we have 2 meetings of the Select Committee, including hearing from David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, who is up before us tomorrow afternoon. And my view is that I think it's unlikely that the divorce and the new relationship can be negotiated in the space of 18 months, certainly the 18 months that Michel Barnier spoke about, the chief negotiator for the Commission, when he gave that speech very, very recently. What are the big issues? The big issues are, how is the British government, going to reconcile its desire to control free movement? And I would say that in the referendum in Britain, when migration immigration was discussed, and it was posited over here, no control and some control, it was some control that won out with the 52%. But many people I spoke to who voted leave then said, but we're not arguing that there will not be a continued need for migration into the United Kingdom from Europe. Of course there's going to be a continued need. Who is going to be picking the vegetables in East Anglia? Who's going to be delivering the lectures at Leeds University? Who's going to be putting a cast on our leg when we break it in the Leeds General Infirmary? Who's going to be running businesses and setting up new businesses and bringing their entrepreneurial ideas? How are scientists going to cooperate in the fight against diseases, to develop new products, if we don't have a good flow of ideas and people between our nations? But how will the government set out its wish to control free movement in some way, and how that then relates to membership of the single market? Because the EU27 have said very clearly, if you want to control free movement, that will breach one of the 4 inviolable principles on which the European Union is based, including free movement. Therefore, you cannot be members of the single market. And then the question is, what is the degree of access to the single market that can be achieved? I hope that we will remain in the customs union, as I said, because do we want to see a return to tariffs between our countries? No, we don't. It would certainly not help with the situation between Northern Ireland and the Republic. What is going to happen to EU citizens who are in Britain and Brits abroad? Now, the sensible solution is obvious. You pick a date and say, everyone who was there before that date, you can stay with all of your rights protected. And in my view, the sooner that can be done in the negotiations, the better, because the thing that is most difficult in these circumstances is uncertainty for our economy, for our people, for your economy, and people here, for the people of the 27 member states. Will we continue to cooperate, as I believe we must and we should, on things like foreign policy, defence, security, the fight against terrorism? I met no one in the referendum, no one, who said, I'm voting to leave because I think Britain shouldn't be cooperating with 27 other European countries in responding to Russia's incursion into Ukraine, or tackling climate change, or dealing with the movement of refugees. And it would be a profound mistake to allow Britain's withdrawal from the European Union to undermine the necessity of international cooperation in the modern era. Because there are 2 fundamental currents in conflict, in part, right across the world. One is the recognition that we need to work together above the nation state to tackle these big challenges that we share. We are an interdependent human race. We're 7.4 billion human beings. By the time my 2 grandsons reach my age, they'll be sharing the planet with 10 billion men, women and children. Now, either we learn to work together to solve the problems that we face, to cooperate, to deal with climate change, threats to peace and security. You look at the horror unfolding in Aleppo today as the final phase of the battle for control unfolds. We know we need to do this as human beings, but on the other hand, people are saying in a world in which lots of change is taking place and we're not entirely sure that we like all of it, we don't feel we have much control over it, there is a thirst for devolution of power. And we see that reflected right across our politics. And in life, in politics, it's about getting the balance right. And over time, the balance can change. And I think for Europe, and you mentioned this, Ivana, Europe also needs to reflect on the outcome of the referendum in Britain, because, in truth, I think it should say to itself, how come we lost one of our most important and influential countries? How did this occur? Especially when many of the other member states, not all, but many, know that the forces that gave rise to it, and they look at the way in which politics is moving in the Western world, are present in their countries too. And I think Europe itself needs to reform. I campaign passionately for Remain, not because I think Europe is perfect. It isn't. It needs to change. But I campaign for Remain because I think we need to find ways of working together. And even though this process is now going to unfold, we continue to need to find ways of working together in a new and a different relationship in which we are going to get this right. And the challenge for us of the Labour family always has been and always will be, we need to apply our values to the problems of the future. When people say to me, what can Labour in Britain do to prosper and to do well? We have got to look at the future, look to the future, and show how our values can find answers to the challenges that we see in our society to create a fairer and more equal world. And despite the fact we're leaving, that is something that our two parties and our two countries will continue to cooperate on over the months and the years ahead. Thank you very much.